Hello there, Cello Ben here, and welcome back to Music History Mondays, where I take you with me on a trip through musical history. Now, last time we covered Jean-Baptiste Lully, and while I was thinking about other composers to cover, I realized you don't have to cover a composer to make a music history video. And after all, I am Cello Ben, I'm not Composer History Ben. So I decided to make a video about cellists. Specifically some of the greatest and most influential cellists to ever live, going back as far as people born almost 300 years ago. Obviously, a cellist from back then is not going to have recordings available. So how do we deal with deciding if they're a great cellist? Well, we're going to put them in our list based upon contemporary accounts of their virtuosity and/or their influence on cello playing through their writings. And we're going to travel through history towards the present day. We won't have time to cover everyone, but we will talk about a whole bunch of folks in a lightning round of some people you've probably heard of and some that you probably haven't. I'm just going to set one main ground rule. I'm not going to cover anybody who was alive in the last 40 years. Those cellists are more likely to have had connections with players who are living today, or maybe indeed themselves living today. And that puts me in slightly dicey territory because I don't want to offend anyone by excluding someone that they thought should have been on this list. So by not including anyone who was alive recently, we will almost eliminate that problem. Okay, now that I've gotten that disclaimer out of the way, let's put on our powdered wigs and head back to the 18th century. We'll go in chronological order by year of birth. We begin in Bella Italia, or at least what is now Italy, with Salvatore Lanzetti, born around 1710. He was born in Naples, where he studied and then entered courtly service in Turin. He wrote gobs of sonatas for cello and basso continuo. Some are thought to be for violoncello piccolo, the same 5-string instrument for which Bach's 6 is thought to have been written. However, even some of his music that's thought to have been written for a 4-string cello goes quite high. Hard stuff, but luckily we have thumb position as an option, and Lanzetti knew that. In fact, he is credited as a pioneer in the development of thumb position, so he definitely is a good guy to have on our list. Next up, Giovanni Battista Cirri. Cirri was also born in present-day Italy, and like Lanzetti, he was also a composer. He bounced around a little bit, going to Paris for a while and then ending up in London, where also like Lanzetti, he had courtly employment. When Mozart gave his first London public concert at the age of 8, Cirri was there playing. He was also involved with the so-called Bach-Abel concerts, where friends Carl Friedrich Abel and J.C. Bach would present their pieces. Being tapped to work with these composers implies to me that the guy knew how to play cello, so welcome to the list, Giovanni. Okay, let's go to France. Jean-Louis Duport. His older brother Jean-Pierre was also a cellist, but I'll argue that Jean-Louis was a bit more influential to the field because of his writings. He authored a giant treatise on cello technique, with lots of focus, especially on the left hand. Furthermore, he included a companion set of 21 etudes, the first of which gave me a swift kick in the pants in college. Fun fact about Duport, he had a Strad that was later owned by Rostropovich, and which Napoleon wanted to try out when they met. That is, Duport and Napoleon, not Rostropovich and Napoleon. Anyway, I'm looking forward to diving more into his treatise, now that I know of its existence from my research for this video. Another cool thing about Duport was that he was really diligent about liking and subscribing to Cello Ben's videos, which is really something worth emulating. I think he was also prone to clicking on the bell for notifications. Now, let's head back to present-day Italy, because there's no way we can do a video about influential cellists without talking about Luigi Boccherini. For one thing, he's the most prolific in terms of compositional output of all the folks we've discussed so far. A bunch of cello concerti, tons of chamber music, and even some symphonies. As far as his compositional style goes, he's said to have had some influence from Cirri, whom we just discussed. It's a small world indeed. Boccherini is said to have been an extreme virtuoso, even going so far as to be an understudy for concertizing violinists, and playing their concerti at pitch when they became ill. He ended up making his home in Spain, where he found inspiration in local popular music. Time to head eastward for a look at a real heavy hitter in cello history, Bohemian cellist Antonín Kraft. He was buddies with a lot of the bigwigs of the day, namely Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. Ever heard of them? Yeah, that's what I thought. He worked at the Esterházy court, where Haydn also worked, and where he wrote his D major cello concerto for Kraft. The cello part of the Beethoven triple was also written for him, but his son claims to have done the premiere. Perhaps that's a mystery lost to history. Kraft wasn't just a cellist, though. He was also a composer. He wrote some sonatas, some duos, even a cello concerto. I've also heard speculation that he may have actually written at least one of the cello concerti attributed to Haydn, but I have no idea if that's true or if it's just people blowing smoke, and it would be tremendously irresponsible of me to present it as truth. Regardless, the guy was important in cello history. Okay, wir gehen nach Deutschland! Bernhard Romberg. Romberg is one of those cellists whose names you might have seen because of his writings. Kind of like Duport. He had a substantial compositional output, cello concerti, string quartets, and variations to name a few. Like Duport, he was also the author of a big meaty treatise on cello playing. He delves into all kinds of topics, from trills to bow technique to chamber music to the concept of upbeats. I certainly had fun perusing it during my research. Romberg was also a key figure in modernizing the cello. He advocated for various changes in the instrument's configuration, including what's now become the so-called Romberg bevel, which is an alteration of the fingerboard under the C string to help prevent buzzing. Furthermore, he's said to have invented the symbol that we use for the thumb in notated fingerings, and at least helped to standardize cello music to only use 3 clefs. There's one unfortunate thing about this guy that we have to talk about, though. He knew Beethoven, and the two played chamber music together. Super cool thing for one's resume, of course. The story, though, goes that Beethoven offered to write him a cello concerto, and he said no. He said he just wanted to perform his own music. I'm not 100% sure that this is true, but some folks are pretty angry at Romberg, thinking that perhaps he's the reason why we don't have a proper Beethoven cello concerto. I mean, we have the triple, but we don't have one that's just cello and orchestra. Despite this controversy, though, he is clearly a pretty important dude to put on our list. So come on in, Bernhard. Still in Germany, we turn to Friedrich Dotzauer, born not terribly long after Romberg. Like his predecessor in this video, he was someone who might as well have just been named Mr. Treatise, because he produced a lot of educational materials. Some treatises, and also something like 43 billion etudes, plus some chamber music and cello concerti. As a player, he became the principal cellist of the Staatskapelle Dresden. While he was there, he played under Weber and Wagner and was part of the premieres of 2 operas by the latter. But we know him today mostly as our friendly teacher who lives on our bookshelves. Who's next? How about Carlo Alfredo Piatti? Born near Milan, he started off on violin, taking after his father. When he switched to cello, he took lessons from his great-uncle, before entering the conservatory in Milan. At one point, he was forced to sell his cello to pay medical bills. However, he borrowed a cello and performed at a recital at Franz Liszt's invitation, and Liszt was so taken by his playing that he got him a new cello. That probably already tells you a lot of what you need to know about him as a cellist. He went on to have a robust performing career. But the reason we really remember him today is for his 12 caprices, which cause great distress to cellists all around the world. They're incredibly technically difficult, and they're a mainstay in the studies of many, many advanced players. I've only learned 2 of them myself, but perhaps I'll get to the other 10 at some point in my life. Maybe tomorrow, maybe March 17th, 2047? We'll see. Back to Germany, Bernhard Cossmann. Even though he was born in the same year as Piatti, his birthday was a little bit later, so we had to do a little bit of extra traveling to keep this truly in chronological order. Like Piatti, Cossmann had a substantial solo career. He was also a teacher at the Moscow Conservatory and was part of the founding of Frankfurt's Hochkonservatory. He knew Franz Liszt, again, kinda like Piatti. And like Liszt, Cossmann was prone to writing fantasies on existing musical themes. He also wrote a fiendishly difficult transcription of Schubert's Erlkönig, also kinda like Liszt did for piano. But he's perhaps most famous now for his agility studies, which are notorious among countless cellists who begrudgingly practice them. They know they're difficult, but by golly can they be helpful. If you'd like to see a video on Cossmann's etudes, let me know in the comments below, because I've thought about doing one, and if people really want to see one, then I'll think even harder about it. Okay, Grützmacher. Friedrich Grützmacher was that's really hard to say. was another big etude guy. I remember someone telling me recently about his 24th out of 24 etudes in Opus 38, which is unbelievably difficult. And I was going to make a video about my process of learning it, but honestly, I gave up, at least for now. I don't have the time or the willpower to do that. There's so much tough technical stuff in there, and apparently a lot of other people feel the same way, because I wasn't able to find a single recording of it. Turning away from the extremity of that one though, he wrote a lot of etudes that are much more manageable, and plenty of other music too, like concerti and chamber music. He was also a prolific arranger and editor. If you have a bunch of cello music, go ahead and browse through, because chances are you'll find at least one thing that he edited in there. During his life, Grützmacher was active as a principal cellist and teacher. He was part of the premiere of Strauss's Don Quixote and was the teacher of Wilhelm Fitzenhagen. We won't cover Fitzenhagen much in this video, but he was the guy who premiered Tchaikovsky's Rococo Variations. He's also somewhat of a co-composer of the piece, because the original is far different from what it became when he got done with it. And the Fitzenhagen version is the one that's typically played today. So I think it's safe to say that Grützmacher and Fitzenhagen were both quite influential, and both merit inclusion on this list. Okay, time for one of the folks that so many cellists are already going to know, David Popper. He was born in Prague in what was then Bohemia, but ended up in Hungary where he taught at the Budapest Conservatory. That school is now named after Liszt, who was the one who also recommended Popper for the position. Liszt wasn't the only big cheese that Popper worked with, though. He also played chamber music with Brahms, including the premiere of Brahms' Third Piano Trio. But let's talk about what Popper wrote now. Of course, there's the High School of Cello Playing, the famous book of 40 etudes. I've probably played about 10 of them, and I'm sure that many of my colleagues have played way more. Those are overall for advanced cellists, with some perhaps being suited for intermediate players, but he also wrote etudes for folks who are earlier in their journey with the cello. He also wrote plenty of non-pedagogical repertoire. The Hungarian Rhapsody, for example, which is always a delight, or the Requiem, which I just performed recently. A gorgeous piece for 3 celli and piano. David Popper makes our list without question, especially given how much he still permeates the lives of cellists. Victor Herbert! He was born on the English Channel island of Guernsey, I hope I pronounced that right, before moving to Germany. When in Germany, guess who his cello teacher was? Bernhard Cossmann. Remember that guy? Anyway, he finished up his studies in Germany. He got noticed by Brahms, which he could use as a really big flex, I guess, and eventually moved to New York City, where he became principal cello of the Met Opera Orchestra. Those who know Victor Herbert today are more likely to know him for his compositions as opposed to his playing, namely his operettas. Probably his most famous is Babes in Toyland. But he did write 2 cello concerti, and the main reason I'm adding him here to our list is related to one of those. You see, Dvorak's famous cello concerto wasn't his first. His first is rarely played, and his second one didn't come until almost 30 years later. And the story goes that he decided to write it after hearing Herbert's second cello concerto performed. So if that's true, that means Herbert probably ought to be here. Also, when I was at Juilliard, the scholarship I received at least one year was called the Victor Herbert Prize, so I feel a connection with him there. Okay, time to cover the most famous one on our list so far, probably. Pablo Casals. You know those 6 Bach suites? Yeah, the Bach suites? The reason they're so famous nowadays is likely at least in part because of him. We'll talk about that a little later. Born Pau Casals y de Fillo in Spain, he studied in Barcelona before embarking on his career in his homeland in Paris. Thereafter, he began to become an international superstar. He played for Teddy Roosevelt in 1904 and shortly thereafter debuted at Carnegie Hall. He was a vocal opponent of the fascism that took hold in Spain, and he left saying he would not return until there was democracy again. He settled in France for a while and eventually moved to Puerto Rico, where he founded the Casals Festival, which, as of 2022, was still going. Casals lived his musical life richly. He played, he taught, he conducted, and he composed, perhaps most notably his Song of the Birds. I've grown to like Casals playing much more as I've gotten older. I didn't always love it, but there really is a depth and richness that speaks to me a great deal now. So let's get Bach to back. Wait, back to Bach. When Casals was a teenager, he was in a used music store where he found the 6 Bach cello suites for sale. The story goes that he practiced Bach daily before finally performing the suites in public 13 years later. While his recordings of Bach are markedly different from how most people play the suites nowadays, they are unquestionably pioneering, and to me full of passion and vigor. I was listening to his first suite Allemande as I was writing the script for this very video. There's no way to do a list like this without putting Casals on it. No way at all. Okay, you know the Elgar Cello Concerto? Yeah, the piece that makes everybody weep. Well, we're going to talk about the cellist who made the first recording of it, Beatrice Harrison. She was born in India during the time of British colonial rule. She moved to England as a child and studied at London's Royal College of Music, as well as with Hugo Becker, and at a music school in Berlin. Hugo Becker is another one of those cellists who was a prolific editor and whose name you'll probably see at least once if you peruse a bookshelf full of cello music. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to cover him today, but he was certainly an important person in cello history, and in the career of Beatrice Harrison. He was the one who brought her to the attention of conductor Sir Henry Wood, under whose baton she debuted in 1911. He was impressed, and so was Edward Elgar. As far as I can tell, she wasn't the cellist for the true premiere of the cello concerto, though allegedly that was a disastrous performance, so perhaps she was glad she wasn't involved. However, she was the first cellist to record it. You can see her playing here with Elgar looking on with his giant baton and even gianter mustache. It's a great recording, and it alone easily solidifies her place on this list. He presumably would have thought so too, because he insisted that if he were going to conduct a performance of that concerto, she was going to be the soloist. She was also the cellist for the premiere of the Delius Sonata, as well as his double concerto, which she did with her sister May on violin. She gained an additional spotlight in the world of radio via the BBC. She was working at the time when radio broadcasting was really just starting to become a thing, and she was able to take to the airwaves and let others relish in her beautiful playing. I'll link to a 1928 recording of Harrison playing Elgar, with Elgar conducting the London Symphony Orchestra, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Okay, we have time for one more today, and this happens to be one of my favorite cellists, whose playing I've enjoyed since my childhood, Gregor Piatigorsky. Piatigorsky was born in what was then the Russian Empire, but today is in Ukraine. Known affectionately as Grisha, Piatigorsky studied at the Moscow Conservatory, and he joined the orchestra of the Bolshoi Theater as their principal at the age of just 15. After the Russian Revolution, the Soviet government wouldn't let Piatigorsky leave the country to study elsewhere, so he smuggled himself to Poland on a train, where his cello was sadly shot by border guards. Luckily, he and those with whom he was traveling survived. He ended up in Germany at the age of 18, where he studied with Julius Klengel, another cellist whom we unfortunately were not able to cover today, and Hugo Becker. Hey, remember that guy? Anyway, while supporting himself by playing in a cafe, he came to the attention of Wilhelm Furtwängler, who patronized the establishment. He directed the Berlin Philharmonic at the time, and appointed Piatigorsky as their principal cellist. A while later, Piatigorsky ended up living in the United States. He headed up Curtis in Philadelphia, and moved to LA later on, where he taught at USC. He played with all kinds of big-name musicians, especially Rubinstein, Heifetz, and Primrose. If you're anything like me, you'll have a wonderful time delving into his recordings and just immersing yourself in his playing. His sound is rich but pillowy, and his musicianship can transform you. Now, there are a lot of folks that we weren't able to cover today, and I wouldn't be surprised if I see a large amount of "why didn't you cover this person" in the comments. But there's only so much time for me to get this video out to you. But perhaps we can do that in a part 2 if y'all are interested. Just let me know. For now, I hope that this gives you some fodder for delving into cello history and learning about some of the great cellists who came before us. For now, though, we've come to the end of today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I want to hear all of your hopes and dreams for future videos in the comments. I want to make videos that people really enjoy, and knowing what y'all's preferences are is going to really help me do that. Before I head out, I just want to let you know that if you're an adult who wants to learn cello, I have a course that can help you. It teaches you everything you need to know to get started, even if you've never played an instrument before. And it's available either by visiting the address shown on screen or by clicking the link in the description. And if you're still hungry for more cello and music-related content, I cordially invite you to check out these videos here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.